Oh, hi. I didn't see you there.
Audio Jungle.
Welcome back, everyone, to Fox 24 on the 4 for the 4.
That's right, and today we got a special interview with a special archaeologist who discovered some very interesting facts on ancient Egypt. Personally, growing up, I was a big fan of it. Loved to learn about their society and their culture, so I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Thank you for coming on, Mr. Mariotti. So we put together some questions that you may have answers to.
Well, thank you for having me. And I also think it's important to learn about ancient Egypt. The ancient civilizations, they are our ancestors after all, right? All right, start throwing.
Alright, so we understand that ancient Egypt was a very stable region. Why was that?
Well, it was stable for many reasons. First of all, it was a unified nation, and it was surrounded by mountains, which made it almost impossible to invade. It also had the Nile River, which made weather and agricultural cycles very predictable, and its structures were mostly built with stone.
Interesting. Now, before it was a unified dynasty, it was divided into two regions, and King Menes unified it. How did he do that?
Yes, at the time, Egypt was divided into two regions called Lower and Upper Egypt. One of the kings of the two regions, King Menes, wanted to unite the two kingdoms, and to show unification, he moved the capital to Memphis, which was in between the two regions. He also wore a red and white crown to symbolize his control over both kingdoms. King Menes would go on to become the leader of the first dynasty in ancient Egypt.
Mr. Ansari, Mr. Mariotti, we understand that most ancient societies had their own beliefs, as the Mayans, the Aztecs. What was ancient Egypt's?
The Egyptians believed in many gods, which meant that they were polytheistic. They also believed that there was an afterlife. Therefore, after death, they would mummify the dead to preserve the body and the soul for the afterlife. The name for this eternal spirit was Ka, and it was believed that this spirit reigned forever.
Very interesting. Now we're going to cut to a clip, show you how mummification happens, and we'll be right back.
There's something out there, something under that sand. According to one of the best movies of all time, it's probably a mummy. Hey guys, Julia here for D News. Can you believe we've never talked about mummies before on D News? They're like one of the gateway drugs to science. The practice of preserving the dead probably arose accidentally. Burying the dead in a pit of sand where it's dry might make a mummy. It's easy to imagine how a body preserved in an almost lifelike state became spiritually significant. I mean, many religions consider the incorrigibility of the body to be a spiritual sign. Mummies first fascinated the public in the early 1900s when people would unwrap them in public performances. Dr. Kathleen Shepard from the Missouri University of Science and Technology says these events were poised between spectacle and science. It's kind of a morbid fascination, but we can learn so much from mummies, like spiritual practices of an ancient culture, or even what people ate thousands of years ago. The most famous, or maybe infamous, is the ancient Egyptian mummification process, which dates back to about 3400 BCE. We all learned about this when we were kids. This process removes all the moisture from the body, kind of like turning a grape into a raisin. After removing the internal organs, the bodies are dried out using natron, which is made up of soda ash and baking soda. After being cleaned, the bodies are wrapped in linen and coated in resin. This whole process, including building a sarcophagus or other tomb things, were pretty expensive, so it was usually reserved for the higher-ups or wealthy. But ancient Egypt isn't the only culture to practice preserving their dead. The oldest mummies on Earth are from the Chinchorro culture in South America and date back nearly 2,000 years before the Egyptians. In preparation for burial, bodies were stripped of all their soft tissues. Then the skin was stuffed with vegetable matter. Finally, the whole body was covered in clay. But these mummies are in danger from degradation from climate change. The part of Chile where these bodies are kept is notoriously dry, like hasn't seen a drop of rain in hundreds of years dry. Yet, maybe due to change in climate, there's an uptick of moisture in the air that makes the mummy's skin fertile breeding ground for hungry bacteria. Some of these mummies are turning into black ooze. God, that's so cool. Gross, gross. I mean, it's totally gross. Other mummies include some found in the Canary Islands, which were preserved using a method similar to the Egyptian process, but rather than linen, the Guanche people used animal hides to wrap the body. Some Buddhist monks in China practiced a form of self-mummification. The process starts when the monk lives on a diet of nuts, seeds, and water for about 1,000 days. Afterwards, the monk basically buries himself alive in a small burial chamber and chants. He would have a small bell to ring to let people know he was still alive. When the bell stopped ringing, the chamber would be completely sealed. After 3 years, the chamber would be reopened to see how preserved the body was. If it was well preserved, it would then be placed in shrines and worshipped. Italian monks in the 16th and 17th century mummified their fellow monks by embalming them and dehydrating them on ceramic pipes. The Capuchin catacombs of Palermo hold over 8,000 bodies, including some wealthy and famous people of the time, some of which are eerily well preserved. So basically, we're surrounded by mummies.
Alright, welcome back. Now, that was a very interesting process, but Mr. Mariotti, where were their bodies kept?
Well, that depends on who they were. Many people were buried in tombs, which were single-room burial chambers. Some deceased pharaohs and their queens, however, were kept in spectacular tombs that today you might recognize as the pyramids.
Wait, so the pyramids weren't temples?
No, not at all. Temples were prominent religious monuments that were believed to be the homes of gods and goddesses.
I've always found the pyramids fascinating, the way they built them. Surely the Egyptians must have had an understanding of mathematics and physics to be able to build them, you know. So how'd they do it?
Well, it's funny you should say that. That's also the opinion of many historians and archaeologists, such as myself. We also believe that they used those sciences to improve everyday life.
Alright, this seems like ancient Egypt was very advanced for the time. I'd like to move on to the social class system of Egypt. Obviously the pharaohs were at the top and the slaves were at the bottom, but what else can you tell us about their society?
Something interesting about ancient Egypt's social class system was they had something called social mobility, which meant it was possible for a person to change their social status. It was totally possible that a farmer or a merchant could one day become part of the upper class. And this ability of social mobility was extended to women too, because women were viewed as equals to men.
Wow, that's really different from many other societies. Alright, so I think we've all heard of Narmer Palette. It's a stone tablet with some of the oldest hieroglyphics inscribed into it. And for our viewers at home who might not know, it tells us that Egypt was incredibly powerful when the Narmer was made. My question is, who commissioned art like this?
Well, usually the pharaoh commissioned art, and he used it as a way of proclaiming his or her, remember, women were equal to men, his or her divine right to rule in Egypt. Also, most Egyptian art, including the Narmer, was done in a two-dimensional style called composite view.
Composite view, I've heard of that view. It means depicting the people's bodies facing forward while their heads facing sideways. It's very interesting.
Yes, that's correct.
I've also heard that Egyptians had a set of mathematical ratios that determined how each point of the human body was depicted. Is there any truth to this?
Yes, actually. What you're talking about is called the canon of proportions.
But I've seen the way they depicted people and objects in their art, you know, the head facing one way and the body facing the other. It doesn't look very realistic to me. Were the ancient Egyptians bad at math? Were they just unculturally, you know, hip, or, you know, am I just not understanding something? What's the difference? What's going on?
Well, much of their artwork was stylized, which means it was intentionally made to look unnatural to create artistic effect.
Like what?
One example is how pharaohs and other important societal figures were depicted as much larger than everyone else. This is called hieratic scale, and was used to show how much power or influence a depicted person had.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you for coming on. And before we go, I'd like to show you a quick video on the canon proportions, artistic side of the ancient Egyptians, and up next, cucumbers and why the sales are going up.
Thank you for having me.
It seems that rather than exaggerating parts of the body, Egyptian artists chose to show each part from its clearest angle.
To understand exactly what that means, let's take the body parts one by one. Suppose they want to make a painting or a wall carving of me. Well, starting with the chest, they'd want to show that front on to emphasize its characteristic V shape. But my face would be seen more clearly in profile, like so. And to make the image less complicated, They'd want me to be two-dimensional. But it doesn't stop there. Even though my chest is being shown front on, my arms can still be put together if it shows more clearly what they're doing. Showing the left hand as different from the right hand was just unnecessary. They preferred to show them palms outwards and all the fingers a nice uniform length. What's more, seen from straight on, legs and feet aren't very distinctive, so they'd be shown sideways too. Last but not least, my head. Because however clear my face might be in profile, my eyes would be seen from straight on.
I think we can safely say that this is an unrealistic image of the body.